Time to float. Hello everyone, this review is once again quite late, sorry about that. But anyway, before I talk about this movie, I want to talk quickly about a little something. Just this past weekend, Netflix decided to release something so vile that I don't think it's safe to put on this channel or anywhere on YouTube for that matter. It's called Big Mouth. It's this very explicit cartoon about a group of children going through puberty and all of the confusion associated with it. Keyword is kids and explicit. Yeah, but I don't want to make a video about that. Instead, I'll lighten up the mood and talk about It, another program where strange things happen to a group of children. Now, It is obviously based off of Stephen King's novel of the same name, which I have not read. It would take a very long time if I did. From what I heard, the book's like 1,000 pages long. I can't even read a normal book because I'm too ADD trash and I can't keep my attention for longer than 10 seconds. But anyway, I haven't read the book, so I can't compare it as an adaptation. I mean, I haven't even seen the original 1990s miniseries, so I'm going into this blind. Going into this movie, I didn't know anything other than it was about a group of kids and they start getting attacked by this demon clown Pennywise thing. Now that I've seen it, I now know that it is about this group of kids in this town called Derry. I forget if it's real or not. All I know is that Stephen King himself was actually raised in Maine. Anyway, this group of kids, they get bullied a lot. Most of them already knew each other prior to the events of this movie, but one of them in particular, named Bill, who in this movie, he has a stutter and gets bullied a lot for it. He had a younger brother named Georgie who actually went missing, and everyone thinks that he's dead, but nobody ever recovered a body or anything, so Bill's mindset is, as long as there's a possibility that Georgie's alive, I'm gonna try and find him. So basically, he takes his little circle of friends and is like, hey, let's go try and find Georgie in the sewers. By chance, all of these kids end up meeting each other, and they realize that they've been having these strange experiences with this clown, and after a little bit of research, they learn that this is a pattern. Every 27 years, there have been disappearances of kids, and they decide that they're going to investigate, try and find out the truth behind this Pennywise, and that's what It is about. So how was It? It, in my opinion, was a great movie. It's clearly put together with thought and care. It is very well paced. It has a very successful first act where it sets up the lives of each of these kids and their struggles and what they go through. Some of them get bullied, some of them have problems at home that they need to deal with, but it doesn't go too far into it. It only gives us enough to care about these characters, and it only really shows us stuff about their personal lives if it directly correlates with what they fear. For example, Bill is afraid of seeing Georgie in situations of harm. The kid played by Jack Dylan Grazer in this movie, he's afraid of germs and diseases. He's a germaphobe, and that's kind of a stigma that's given to him by his mother, who always warns him about that type of stuff. Beverly in this movie has some kind of creepy home stuff that she needs to deal with. And then you have Finn Whitehead, who is actually in Stranger Things, and his fear is, well, clowns. And that's all very important because Pennywise, It in this movie, feeds off of the fear of its victims. Fear is basically like seasoning on a chicken breast for Pennywise before he consumes his victims. And now that we're talking about the kids in this movie, I want to talk about the cast. Everyone in this movie does a really good job. All of the young talent, everyone who plays the kids in the Losers Club, they all do a great job with their roles. Their dynamic feels very natural and believable. The way they play off of each other, they have some great banter in this movie. It's really funny, especially from Finn Whitehead's character. He is such a jerk in this movie. He roasts everybody all of the time. I even think there's one point in this movie where he roasts It, although I can't really remember. But anyway, once the scary stuff does start happening, these kids do a great job of portraying the frightened and anxious emotions in a convincing way. And then you have the bullies in this movie, who are very classic bullies, although they are a bit more violent in this movie. They don't just mess with the kids, they are genuinely on a mission to kill them, and that's kind of scary. But anyway, they're played very well, played very classically. But speaking about scary, let's get to the main star of the show. Pennywise, who's played by Bill Skarsgård. Everyone says Skarsgård because they're darn Americans, but it's pronounced Skarsgård. Skarsgård. He makes this character. He portrays Pennywise in such a creepy, off way. He really embodies this character. And Pennywise does have character. He's not just a crazy clown. He has personality of its own, and you can see that. And that's probably carried over from the original story, but anyway, he does a great job of portraying it. And I loved every single time on screen, despite him being the scary dude. I was waiting for him to show up every single time he was in the movie. I loved it. But was this movie scary? That's the big question. And personally, this may come as a surprise, I actually did not find this movie very scary. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that this movie was a bad movie, it was a very good movie. It's just that, in my opinion, it was less scary and more unsettling. This movie does have a bunch of jump scares in it, although it doesn't overload itself with jump scares. The jump scares in this movie that happen are pretty big. Generally, they mark a pretty large point in the story. You can pinpoint them once you leave the theater. And this movie does a good job with balancing jump scares with some actual suspense. It doesn't fully rely on them is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, this movie has a lot going on in it. It's sometimes unsettling, it's a lot of times really funny. I would go as far to say that this movie is more funny than scary, or at least that's how I felt about it. But when this movie was funny, it's because the movie was trying to be funny, at least most of the time. Sometimes it happens during horror scenes. When Pennywise does something that's supposed to be scary, you're like, oh, that's kind of funny what he's doing, but it's more nervous laughter. If you really think about what's going on in the scene, it's quite disturbing. But yeah, that's the thing about this movie. A lot of the scary stuff that happens in this movie has some pretty great meme potential, so I gotta give it some, legit points for that. But overall, what transcends this movie is it still retains an emotional core. For when it's not really that scary, or during the story when the stakes are high, you care about what's going on. You care about these kids. You're with them. They're the underdogs. They're at a very low position, and to make it all worse, Pennywise only appears to the victims that he's targeting. So none of the adults in this situation can actually see what's going on to these kids. They are completely alone, and because of that, it makes them the ultimate underdogs, and everybody loves an underdog story. You root for these kids the entire movie. And that's what drives this movie, is the relationship between these kids, what they go through. That's what this movie is really about, despite it being about a scary demon clown. Overall, I felt like it was a very good movie. It was creepy, unsettling, but at the same time, very funny, very enjoyable, and it maintained an emotional core that drove the story. Now I just want to quickly talk about some spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie, then you can stop here. But I just want to quickly talk about how I felt about the scary stuff in this movie. Ironically, the human stuff in this movie actually ended up disturbing me more than the supernatural stuff, specifically Beverly and her relationship with her pedo dad. He was so creepy in this movie, because that's something that can actually happen. It's something that you can relate to more. And another thing that scared me in this movie were the bullies. Even at the beginning, they're scary guys, they are crazy, and it only gets worse when Pennywise gets to them. He turns one of the bullies into a psychotic killer. He kills his dad, and in the movie he falls into a hole. We don't know if he's survived or if he's off to go kill more people. It's this real life stuff that got to me and stuck with me the most. And speaking of Beverly, she was probably the character that got the most development out of the entire crew. She is an example of how to do a good female character. From my point of view, if you want to make a strong female character, you make a strong character first and foremost, and Beverly is a strong character without it seeming like this is a big SJW fest. She was probably the most compelling character in this whole movie other than Bill, because of her situation and how she overcomes that. Now, this movie will have a sequel. That's actually going to take place 27 years in the future, because you know how the Losers Club ends up making a blood oath at the end of this movie that if Pennywise were to return anytime, then they would be back to defeat him once and for all. So that means that they're gonna come back as adults in the thick of their lives to try and defeat Pennywise. And from what I've heard, the original story was actually told from the perspective of the modern story, and then the past story, the kid's story, is told through flashbacks, and the story beats play out at similar times. Personally, I find that as a more interesting way to tell a story, but if they decided to do that with this movie, then it would have ended up being like 4 hours long, probably. So I understand why they're doing it chronologically. But anyway, that's my thoughts on it. Overall, really good movie, definitely worth seeing. You can let me know what you thought about it in the comments section. And yeah, share with your crew, your gang, your Losers Club, whatever you want to say. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
I was working in the lab late one night.
Hey, you should subscribe.
Hey, I got designer from head to my toe. I'm a designer, my bitch on the